Hello everyone, welcome. It's Tuesday again. I don't know why I say that every time, 'cause it's always Tuesday. But last week was Tuesday as well. It's always Tuesday. Hello, you're live with me again. We're going to be spending the next hour in that program up there, Capture One. Some of you may have noticed that I'm back into the red t-shirt, by the way. The red t-shirt comes from a clever plan I thought I had, which was by using red on the lower part of me, you wouldn't notice the upper part of me got sunburned in the back garden of a British house the other day. But it turns out, now seeing on the camera, because I can, this is just accentuating it. So I'm going to go with blushed. Anyway, wear sunscreen, kids. Bad for you. Right, we're going to spend the next hour with you guys live in that one. Capture One. So Capture One being the software that is written by the clever guys out in Copenhagen in Denmark, and it takes the data from your sensor in your camera that's saved into what we refer to as a raw file, but that could be something that's called .cr2, .cr3, .raw, .nrf, whatever. Loads of .nef, loads and loads of different file formats, but basically the raw data from your camera, we then can process it in Capture One and basically pump out something that should be more aligned to what you remember seeing or wanted the picture to represent when you took it. So when you take a picture, you can take a picture as a JPEG, which is a flat file, which is very limited in what you can change, or you can save it as RAW, or you can save it as both in most cameras. Same on a phone, actually. So most phones now allow you to save in RAW, and it just gives us more room, more scope to make changes, and that's what we're going to do today. So I've got a load of your images that you've uploaded via there. So if you want to know how to get your image in, it's there, paulreeferlive.wetransfer.com. We'll pick them up and we will process them with you. So for those of you that are live, nice, Paula, nice. We could do a live skin tone challenge from this live broadcast. That'd be quite fun. For those of you that are live, and thank you, Ramo, we need you to be interactive. Not like that. Don't be kind. But please, if I say something that doesn't make sense, or if we do something that you think actually we could do something differently, or I've done that before, or there's a better way of doing it, or a worse way of doing it, or a thing that you don't understand, put it in the chat and we'll try and answer as many of them as possible. There's always a little bit of a delay, remember that. So when you put something up in the chat, remember it's from about 5 or 6 seconds in the future that I actually broadcast it. So I'm not ignoring you. It might just take a couple seconds for me to see it, and then we can try and answer anything as we go. Okay, a few things, so housekeeping things before we get editing. Number one, Facebook group. You'll find me referring to that in a minute, but if you don't know where it is, it's there, or it's there somewhere in the description of this video. So if you want to join in with some of the stuff in between these sessions, that's where to do it. There is no editing session next week. The reason is because I'm going out to play with a new toy, this one. So we talked about last week, they've got day 0 support in Capture One for the new Fuji GFX 100 RF, which is actually a very funky camera, quite liking it. It's a little compact thing, quite nice. So I'm going to go play with that for a week, which means that there's no live editing next week. The next live editing will be on... Oh, sorry, we're out of sync, are we? Let's try this. Is that better? Sorry if it was out of sync, voice out of sync, not sure. Either way, it should be better now. Next session will be on the 15th of April, so 2 weeks' time. Okay. What are we going to start with? We're going to start with this fun one. I put this in the Facebook group earlier today. Interesting. So Iceland Air have launched a new campaign, and I think they're going to be one of quite a few that talk about the fact that AI images are unfortunately setting a very unrealistic expectation for travellers when it comes to them arriving at their destination and not seeing the stuff that they were shown. And yes, you can have a look at the advertising campaign. They've done it in lots of different cities. It's quite a quirky little Icelandic way of doing it. But the interesting bit, the fun fact, 19% of only 19% of travellers would still book a trip or service or accommodation if they knew the main promotional images were AI generated. And I worry that actually a lot more than 19% of images are being generated, let alone 19% of people cancelling. So you're starting to see some bite back. And a lot of the stuff that we do in this session is about getting things back to real. So I'm not a fan of creating things that weren't there. Most of you that have been on here for a while will know that. But for those of you that want to experiment with AI and whatever, it's great. It's great for creating stuff. It's great for producing things that never existed. But please flag it as that. A lot of the stuff that we do here is landscape. And if you're setting an expectation of this is a place that I went to and it patently wasn't, I question you. Anyway, things that actually did happen. Last month's competition. For those of you that don't know what this is, go to the Facebook group. It's in there. Every month, fun little competition. No real prize apart from the honour of getting awarded with a David Grover trophy or Grophy. So, competition. Last month's. These are the runners-up. Close, but no cigar. There's David Grover. This one here from Noel. I really like this. So a lot of aerial shots don't have context, right? They're always just bird's eye view. And that bird's eye view can actually be a little bit obscure because we don't know if it's a satellite image or if it's from a drone, from a helicopter, or whatever. There's no context to look at it. And I'm a big fan of rooftop shots because they can give you, if you include the rooftop, a lot of context. And this one, I'm guessing antenna, tower, something like that. But anyway, this one here, quite like that. Love the positioning of it. Next up, Allison. Great shot, that great capture. Good timing. Granted, the bird is not flying. They started pretty high, and I'm pretty sure they're going to get higher than I will. The right-hand shot, Lars. I was debating whether this can be allowed because there's 4 shots there, but actually each and every one of them great. This one here is quite cool. This one up here. Because you actually get the moon melt that I quite like with plane engines as they go by with the heat. But well done, you 3. Very, very nice shots. But they didn't quite win. The one that won is Roger's shot. I think it was Swiss Alps, he said. Maybe I got that wrong. But well done, Roger. That's a really cool shot. And actually, it's quite an impressive amount of focus you got in there. It's not quite sharp at the very, very near end of it. But overall, for perspective and for context and for tones and for leading lines and all those things, you get one of those David Grover special Grophy. Well done. And that's it. There are no cash alternatives. Any complaints, send them to me and they'll be deleted. Wonderful. Right. Assuming all of the things like sound are in sync again, and I hope they are. Yell if they're not. Let's go into Capture 1. So starting with Richard's shot that we stopped at last week. Oh, David was not stood in the forest. Right, so a forest scene. And Capture One's interface, I'm going to start with a couple of the basics because not everyone has been here for a long time before. But we have our folders down here. We have our filters and so on. So if you're in a catalog, which this is, this allows me to filter images based on whether they've got a color tag, keywords, dates, and so on. And I can set up smart albums and user collections and so on. There are other lives that we've done that talk about catalog management. Please have a look at them. But we've got our catalogs and files on the left-hand side. We've got our preview images on the right-hand side. So for each person in here, there's a preview of what's coming next. We've got our preview images, and then we've got our toolbar on the top. One of the most useful tools in Capture One is this one, before and after, especially for me in this context, because Richard has sent in this file, as you all do, as a WeTransfer upload as an EIP, which is a packaged file. To send me your files, right-click on the image, go to Export, and you go to Export Original Files. And under there, you will see this button here that says Export as EIP, and you will be forced effectively to include adjustments. What that means is I get access to the original file, the raw file, plus the adjustments you've made, all of these different layers, plus any copies or variants that you've created, so that I can see the progression of what you've been editing. And it means that I can do the first thing that I always do whenever I get one of your images in, which is click before and after, because it lets me see what the camera delivered and what's been edited. So this is out of the camera before. This is the edited file. Good, we are in sync. Roger's confirmed, unlike the exported files in Capture One. Sorry, Roger, I can't fix that one remotely. Right, so first impressions, and you guys will, some of you will obviously know this from a long time ago. I don't look at these hugely in advance. Yes, obviously when we import them, I get to see what the preview is, but you're seeing this as I see it. And if I look at this file initially, all I'm looking at is what has changed and what would I change from the original. And what has changed, pretty obviously, is the amount of contrast. So if I were to create a new variant, so again with that EIP, you see these little numbers 1 and 2, that EIP would package up both variants. So here I've got one with all the changes, and here I've got the one out of the camera. There to there. And if I look at these two, while this one has a lot more detail recovered, what it's missing is the atmosphere that was in this bottom one. Because that atmosphere sort of, it almost draws you to that main central trunk, right? And this isn't about composition, this isn't about choice of subject and so on, but it is about how do we keep the viewer's attention on the subject that I was drawn to. And I'm guessing at this point Richard was drawn to this great big tree trunk. Well, in here, in this top version, it's become less of a subject. It's actually sort of faded out of fame, I guess. And most of that is because of this contrast shift. So there's been a lot of recovery done. So if we look at in here, huge amount of recovery done in terms of getting some of this light back and detail in the background. But I think it's to the detriment of the overall toning and the overall feel of that image. If I look here at these ferns, they're crisp, they look fresh, they look very green. Here we go into this sort of yellowing, slightly muddy, you know, we've lost some of the highlights, but we've also lost the shadows. So I'm losing some of the texture. And again, maybe it's just me, maybe, of course, everything that we're doing is my opinion for this next hour rather than yours. But to me, it's dropped off, it's flattened. And that's not because it's gone too HDR'd. It's not that the dynamic range has been too forced into the middle, but it's just little things all add up, and you end up with this sort of flattening and slightly softening of the image. And yes, to Paula's point, you're losing the drama. So where I would come at with this, and let's just look at the layers that Richard's got, because we may be able to do it in reverse, or we do it from building up. So let's first off just turn off all of these different layers so I can see what each one is doing. Good. So we've got our image layer. The first thing I'm going to do is flag this one as red, which I did using the minus key on my keyboard. You can, of course, do it with, oops, what's going on there? By changing your color tag to one of the colors that you've got by mouse, or you can use the minus, plus, times, whatever symbols in your numeric pad. So this one here I flagged because I want to make sure that I'm editing the same one each time, and this is Richard's original. The image layer here, if I go before and after, well, it's darkened down. So how is that? Because we've got no other layers going, and it's just got darker. Bit odd, right? And if I look through all of these tools, these are all empty. No changes there. No changes on these levers. But what I think has probably happened, yeah, is this. The curve, so in other words, how Capture One interprets the raw data from the camera to deliver it into the application. When you're seeing the file for the first time, you're not seeing raw data. No one is looking at raw data. If you think you are, wrong. You're not looking at the raw data. If you were, it wouldn't look like a picture. you're looking at Capture One or any other software program's interpretation of that raw data, and that includes importing it with a curve. So in other words, adjusting shadows and highlights and so on across the color range. Now this curve in this case is what's called a linear response, which is a choice you can make. If I go to auto, there's no difference. Before, after, before, after. Switch to linear response, and it's all got darker, flatter. And the reason is that this curve that we're talking about, and what I'm going to do just to make the point here, I'm going to add in a new tool, which will be base characteristics. Why didn't I see that? Yeah, there, going blind. Right, my base characteristics tool, I'm just going to put above the curve so we can actually see what's going on when we do it. Because I think this is quite important. In fact, let's put that literally in there. Linear response, auto, film shadow, film contrast, film standard, which incidentally is the auto curve for most cameras. Now, if you have, for instance, a Fuji camera or certain Nikon cameras, you're going to find a lot more curves that are available to you in that drop down. It includes some of the film simulation effects and so on. But linear response is as close as we can get to raw data. It's not really raw, but it doesn't really adjust. It doesn't boost anything. It's not lifting midtones. It's not pushing shadows. It's not doing anything clever like film standard does. So if you imagine this is closer to what came out of the camera, this is what Capture One by default will load in. So when you're seeing Capture One's initial import, that's what you're seeing. Is an interpretation using the film standard profile or the one that you've preloaded in your camera, if it's a Fuji or something like that, on the screen in the preview. You're not seeing the raw data, and the closest you can get to raw data is linear response. Now in this case, Richard's loaded on linear response as a starting point. There's nothing wrong with doing that. If I have a look at here, and let's look at film standard, we've got some highlights blown, right? If I turn on my exposure warning, with linear response, not much overexposed. Film standard, a lot more. Those red warnings come up. And the reason is because the film standard curve, even though this curve, your curve, the one that you can edit, so you can go into here and raise and lower. So even though your curve isn't adjusted, behind the scenes in the base image, Capture One has already adjusted it with film standard, which puts in a little bit of a subtle S-curve. And what that's meant is it's pushed some of these highlights outside of their normal range of 255. So starting with a linear response is not a bad idea in this case, because you've got a very high contrast image. You've got really dark, sort of moody shadows, and then you've got these really bright specular highlights, which even with linear response, you've still got some little warnings on there. But it's only the green channel that's clipping. It's not all of them. So if I'm starting from linear response, the next layer that Richard's got on there is tones. I'm just going to remove this from this panel. And in this one, bear this in mind, we started with linear response, which protects our highlights. Richard's gone further and pulled highlights all the way down, minus 79. Shadows lifted a little bit. You wouldn't really notice that. Blacks lifted a lot by 21. And that's the lower 5% effectively of the darkest parts of the image. That's been lifted a lot. And the whites have been pulled down a bit. So if I were to undo the HDR section, just temporarily, so hold down the Option key or the Alt key on your keyboard and click and hold. So that's without any HDR changes. And that's with. Now, some will say that's recovered. I would say it's been flattened. And that's a problem, because it flattened all of the drama, the toning, the contrast, all of that's gone. And you've got another here lowering of brightness as well in this image. So I'm worried that this, it actually gets more compounded. There is also a luma curve in here. So what we mean by this, RGB will also affect perceived saturation. Luma curve will only affect the luminosity. So the 0 to 255, it affects them all as if they were grayscale. So it's just shifting them all the same amount regardless of any difference. So if I were to raise here, the blue is going to be hit more than the green, for example. Whereas on a Luma curve, it's not. It's going to lift everything by the same amount, which means you get less of an issue with overblowing saturated colors and so on. But the problem is that this curve limits our highlights. So we've lost more drama. So not only have we recovered highlights, we've recovered white, we've pulled down brightness, and it's a linear response curve, and we've prevented any value in this image from going above 230. I've just taken all the light away. And then we've lifted the midtones. So we've just crushed all of the shadows to be lifted up into the middle part of the histogram, and all the highlights to be pushed down into the middle part of the histogram. Then we've taken the middle part of the histogram and we've lightened it. But what you've lightened is something that's very flat. We've lost again that drama. If I were to undo this curve, it goes very dark, but the lightening isn't through highlights coming up. It's through the midtones. It's actually, this curve is actually darkening the highlights. So to me, this is a really dangerous layer because we've already got a flat image from linear response. I would be in a place of, I don't need to recover those highlights here. I don't need to recover the whites. I don't need the black to be recovered quite so much. And I certainly don't want to limit anything to only coming out of 230. That's going to really limit my brightness. If I print this image, it's going to be very, 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 very low tone. The mid-tone lift, I'm okay with that, but I'd rather see a lift that goes a bit more like this. So a flattened low-end lift, and then maybe some peaks up here in the upper mid-tones. So I'm keeping drama. I'm changing that curve to lift things rather than just flatten in the middle. And then this brightness minus 10, no, don't need it. We literally don't need it. I'm looking at the exposure warnings. There's a little bit out there. I'm not too fussed about that. That's a specular highlight. It's the sky. I'm okay with that. And actually, in recovering it, I think, yeah, what Richard's actually done is he's healed it anyway. So that bit, none of the other stuff really helped anyway. So this tone one, I would change to be this. If we're talking about tones, by the way, specifically color tones rather than necessarily brightness, maybe this is a good time to play with a bit of split toning. So I'd be in a place of, we pull our shadows down to be slightly moodier and blue, and maybe our highlights we bring into being a little warmer. So if I do a before and after, before and after, maybe a bit too much, I want to pull that back a touch. But I quite like that. That's given me a little bit more of an earthier feel, if you see what I mean. So it's gone from this sort of yellowy into a nice sort of silvery blue sort of look. Again, personal choice. That's the key thing with this. Quick questions. Let's just cover some of these. So Keith, glad you described the impact of linear profiles. We're going to do some more of that, I think, today, because I think from memory there's some other stuff that's coming along. Paula, is auto curve an RGB curve? I believe it is. The auto curve is actually the film standard curve, and it came from memory before the Luma curve even existed. So I believe it's an RGB curve. JD, regarding linear response, do you think that the linear response for an IQ3 100 is better for a retouch to start work or the auto curve? Hold that thought. We'll come on to it in a second. Yeah, we'll come on to exactly that in a second. Right. Back trees. Next one of Richard's layers. And by the way, this is not an assassination of Richard. Please don't take it as that. This is genuinely, so Richard's question was, would I have edited it differently? These are the ways that I'd probably approach it slightly differently. That's all. So if this is the edit of what you remember, then stick with it. But this is just a different approach. So those back trees, let's have a look. We've got a mask, I'm guessing, up here. And with that, we're lifting brightness. Okay, now remember, a lot of these adjustments were because the previous layers darkened everything down. It was dim. So we've got to have all this brightening now that's happening, which is talk about seesawing. It's a bit of a challenge there. But we've got brightness lifted and we've got shadows lifted. Okay, so if I were to turn this off, I think you only need about half of that adjustment. There's nothing else in here, no. So I would be in a place of maybe we back that away to about 50% opacity. So remember, we can adjust the tools independently, but you can also adjust the overall impact of all of the tools in one go through the opacity slider. So you've got this one little slider up here that says take all of the changes I made down below on all of these other different tabs as well. So it could have been the color editor, it could have been the detailed tab or whatever, and then only apply 50% of all of it. So that's why we do a lot of this stuff on layers. It's useful. The ferns. So in here, in the front, so these have been lifted. Now, again, they were lifted because they were darkened. So because I haven't darkened them so much, they don't need quite so much lift. If we do want to lift them, I'm okay with that. I don't think they need quite so much saturation, because that's already been handled with color editor, or sorry, with color balance. Red bits. I'm guessing we mean the autumn leaves. So, okay, let's have a look at our mask. So this looks like it's either a magic brush or a Luma range mask, possibly a magic brush mask. And it's, oh no, maybe it's color editor. I think, yeah. So what's happened is Richard has created a mask using the color editor, made it into a layer. So the way that we do that very quickly, let's create a, let me think, let's create a new layer just for completeness. Color editor, I would pick on this color in here. And in fact, for this case, I'd say view selected color range. So it puts everything else into black and white. I might want to make it all saturated so I can see just for now. And when I'm happy with that color range, which may mean adjusting the scope of that range, yeah, I go up to here, the three magic dots with the color editor, and go to create masked layer from selection. And that takes the color editing that I did, so choosing that red color, and it creates a color range mask. If I go back to my adjustment layer, the color editor changes are still there. Everything I did is still there. So it hasn't moved it, so I'd have to delete this layer. But now I have a layer with all of that color range as a mask, literally. Problem is that color range is not exactly exclusive. So let's look at the color range on this one. Oops, sorry. So I'm guessing Rich has done some erasing over there, but this isn't exactly a precise mask, I would say. It's catching a lot. And there's red, so what's happening? We've got a pull down of shadows. We've got a changed custom white balance for them. Okay, so it's warmed up and pinked a little bit. There's a Luma range or Luma curve on here again to lift up the midtones. So I don't think it needs that much. That would be my first thing. Is there any color editing going on? Yeah, there is. So where did I see that? Overall, so there's a saturation lift in the color editor, basic. The basic tab there has its own saturation slider, which will go further than, sorry, the same as that. The advanced color editor allows you to really obliterate colors, but this one is an overall saturation slider, so it's boosted it there. I would argue that's probably quite an obscure place to do that. If you just want to boost saturation, just like that, I'd do it with this slider here, but fine. But there's our red bits. Now, well, the worry that I've got is that lifts it all. It makes it all very happy. And this doesn't feel like a happy thing. It feels like it should be more muted. So I'm going to pull down that saturation. I'm actually going to counter what was done below. Creek on the left-hand side. So lifting that and brightening it. I get that, but it doesn't need brightening so much, again, because we've already fixed some of the brightness issues. So I'm going to half that off. The bank. That's just a little lift. No issue there. Happy with that. Roots. So we're darkening this bit. Okay, I'm going to 50% that too. Tree. This is interesting, isn't it? This layer for the tree actually darkens it. It's an S-curve. So the theory goes with an S-curve. The higher, or the midtones, the higher midtones and the light areas of the image will get brighter. The dark areas of the image will get darker. The problem I have with the tree is there's not really any light areas on it. At best, you're getting midtones. So this bit up here is pointless. If we wanted to lift the midtones and push down the shadows, you need to be lifting sort of here. And there I start to get some more texture and some more shape. And I'm not against that. That starts to stand out a little bit. So to me, that layer may be kind of interesting. I might want to lift up the black a touch on it, just so it doesn't become too obscured. Right, then we've got our heel layer. I'm guessing that's the background. I think this could be tidied up a little bit, Richard. It's a bit... Let's just go to that heel layer. Yeah, it's a bit too obvious that there's been some healing going on there. But I mean, that's for finessing. You can erase and you can heal for hours on end if you want. And then the creek on the right hand side, this darkening down, sorry, lightening up, because again, it was darkened in the first place. So I'm going to back that away again to 45%. So I've made a very big adjustment to Richard's tone layer. Basically backed off most of these other layers because they're not needed quite so much. And we go from there to there, and that being the original. So to me, to my eye, if my subject is this main trunk here, this still keeps it, but the whole thing has been a bit more muted. And actually and this is, I know we all invest in our lenses to get rid of vignetting, but in my head on this one, if I want to pull focus into that middle, I'm going to pull down maybe a one-stop vignette. And if I don't like it out here, I can obviously lift up that brightness down into this stream, but I don't think I've needed it to. So I'd be in a place, and actually just looking at it, maybe I pull this back a touch, and overall, I'm just going to lift our brightness on the overall tone of this image to get to there. Yeah, that sort of works. We haven't touched on crop, we haven't changed anything like that, but to me, if I go from that now, do you see how flat that feels as a picture compared to this? This has got drama, it's got some, there's texture to it, it's earthy, it's the right sort of tone for a mossy, shadowed, forest. Here, we've kind of lost, there's two eyes in there. Now you can't not see that, right? But it's kind of lost its identity in there. It needs to be bolder. Michael, would I add structure to the tree trunk? I actually wouldn't, because there's so much texture on here already. If I add structure, I'm at risk of pushing it too far, and you're going to end up with artifacts and noise that we don't really want. But to me, this is probably where I'd want to go to. This is the shot out of camera. And you can see it's not, we're adding a huge amount of texture, don't get me wrong, but the toning doesn't change too much. Where it changes is this edit here, where everything just becomes fluffy and happy and sunshiny, and it just doesn't feel like you're deep inside some undergrowth in a forest. That's what I want to feel when I see an image like this. I've also got options here with crop, so we haven't touched on crop, but there are potentially things that we could do here. So one is I don't need all of this stuff right down here at the very bottom. I could try with the 1x2. I think it's going to lose too much of that top, but let's just have a little look. I mean, I don't mind that, We've got a nice lead in with that river then. I might want to heal out this little twig. So if we go into here and actually down, well, we'll come on to this in a second. Down here, we're losing focus a little bit, or it's diffracting. But for this twig, let's just go into our healing layer. I'm going to create a new heal layer just to keep it separate because I want to. And I'm going to heal out that twig because it's annoying. And down here, we've clearly got a little bit of a sharpness problem. So I'm going to put in a new layer, and specifically with a gradient mask, so just drawing that gradient up into the image. Very, very soft fall off so I don't notice it. And with that, I'm going to go down to my structure tab and add it in. And you see how that popped right up then? So let's go into 100%. Let's go without that. With that. Without, unsharp, with sharper. Not bad, huh? So to me, do I prefer that one or this one? Actually, I think this one, if I'm being really picky. Would I put the tree off to a 1/3 rather than sort of almost in the middle? Maybe, but I'm happy with this lead in. I'm happy with this pathway, but here just feels not quite right. Now, I wasn't there. Richard, if you were sat there in shorts and t-shirts, sweating because it was such a hot summer's day and it was lovely and warm and yellow light and so on, then I apologise. My picture does not do justice to that scene. But when I look at this out of the camera, it doesn't feel like it should be that warm. It feels like it should look and feel like this. And to me, that's just a safer. Well, maybe that's the wrong thing to do, but I don't know. It's a safer feel for the picture to me to have this sort of look in that sort of scene. Michael, I can't not see the. It's like two eyes and a big trunk. Oh. Keith, the dappled light effects are more pleasing to the eye, which gives more depth to the image. Yeah, this is the problem with flattening out all of that stuff. You lose some of that dappling. You lose the highlights. You lose the bits that draw your eye. And funnily enough, as a result of that crop, I don't need the heel layer. So we could have actually fixed your challenge with that healing layer up here, Richard, by just crop it out. Don't need it. It just feels so much more immersive when you get to that sort of toning. To my eye, that may be wrong. It may be different for you. You may be sat there thinking, "Oh my God, he's ruined that picture. Should have stuck with it." But to me, that's what I would do, and that was the question: what would I do differently? Next, Georg. So, Georg's shot looking straight up. I'm guessing a cathedral or something similar. Auto curve. So remember I said to JD just now, we'll come back to that. I'm going to come back to that on this one and another one as well, because it's actually about recovery. So we're going to fix two things with this shot. The first is it's wonky. I'm not a fan of that. The second, it's already been corrected, just to be clear. So Georg has actually done some corrections on it. Very happy with those corrections. Let's look at before and after. Gone from there to there. Nice edit. I think this has gone too green. We'll have a look at that in a second. But if I look at up here, the recovery that was done from there to there, it's pretty impressive in theory, but it's coming from an auto curve. And here's my challenge. If I create a new variant, so in other words, one that's not been edited at all, with the auto curve, we've got blowout. With the linear response curve, we still have blowout. We can't avoid that. It's bright daylight. But we're starting from a place where a lot of those highlights have already been recovered. A lot of the shadow detail is already recovered. And the reason is because that linear curve doesn't add in that punch of an S curve. It's not adding in the change that says, right, lift my highlights more, push my shadows down more. Because that's what you're actually seeing here. This is the version with an auto curve applied, or a film standard curve applied, which has dropped the shadows, lifted the highlights, whereas linear response says keep it nearer to what the camera actually recorded without that bump, without the boost. Now, the good news is what Georg did is, regardless of the fact this is using an auto curve, a huge highlight and white recovery. And this goes back to which curve is better. Neither of them, one isn't better than the other. It's not a case of which one is better to start with. It's simply down to what you want to spend your time editing. So if you're giving this to, for instance, a retoucher, they're going to either spend on an auto curve, they're going to spend a load of time fixing your highlights and your shadows. On a linear response curve, they're going to spend a load of time adding in contrast. So where do you want them to spend their time? And likewise, if it's you sat at your desk doing the same thing, it's the same equation. Where do you want to spend your time? Because the underlying raw data does not change. If you go from linear response to auto and everything blows out, the details haven't gone. They're still there. They're just needing to be recovered using curves or HDR tools. That you need to get that dynamic range back into our visible histogram. So it's not a case of one is better than the other. It's just they're different starting points, and it is that simple. So in this case here, the starting point was blow them to smithereens. And then what Georg's done is then use the highlight and the white tool to pull them down, and then interestingly use brightness rather than exposure. So exposure shifts everything equally. Brightness squashes, and typically mid-tones to be brighter or mid-tones to be darker, and then it tapers off. So this is a good way of doing it. You've got a recovery in the exposure, basically protecting those very, very blown out areas. So that's partly doing that. You've got a lifting of brightness to get the brightness back in, but then using the HDR tools to recover all the detail that's in the stained glass. So this isn't the wrong way of doing it. It's a good way of doing it. Technically, I would argue these changes could have been done on a new layer. That would have given you the ability to do that opacity change. To do that, right-click, move the image adjustments to a new layer, and off you go. If you do not have this function, by the way, because I was so keen to talk about our competition, I forgot the version we're using today, 16.5.9. The reason I forgot is because they haven't changed the version this week. So exciting. Woke up this morning, no new download. Happiness in a bottle. But back to Capture One. If you are using an older version of Capture One, and quite an older version, you won't see this option here, move image layer adjustments to new layer. Life's about choices. You can stay where you are and that's fine. Or if you want to upgrade for that and other improvements that have happened, then have a look in your account. But that's now moved all of those adjustments from the image layer up to here, which means that now I can control the amount of those adjustments to apply. Anthony, would an ND filter, polarizer, or both have helped with the stained glass window? No. Unless you had an ND filter that was exactly the same shape as this, in other words, it left alone all of this, you would either be protecting the highlights but then losing the shadows, or you'd be protecting the shadows without an ND filter and you lose the highlights. Because it's shaped, it's very, very, very difficult to manage this. The way you would actually manage it is typically you do an HDR shot. And I don't mean by dynamic range in terms of display technology, that's a whole different thing now. But I mean taking 3 bracketed shots, one for shadows, one for highlights, and one as a base exposure. You would select them in Capture One, and you would, oops, weird, thank you. Right click, and you would go to merge to HDR with your 3 different exposures, and that would give you, in theory, a correctly exposed window, a correctly exposed set of shadows, and so on. Most cameras are pretty good at recovering this stuff, but yeah, that would be a way of fixing it here. So when I say it's wonky, here's where I get really frustrated, and we all know this, those of you that have watched for a while. If you are going to go to the effort of changing a rotation or changing a keystone, do it so it's correct. It's like, to me, it's like always driving with the steering wheel 3 degrees off or something like that. If you can do that, why wouldn't you just drive straight? And the same thing with this. If you are going to the effort of making this completely correct, why wouldn't you literally make it correct? So let's look at here. Look at this line here and look at this line here. Even though in the middle we're pretty much level, when we get up to the outside, we've got this twist going on, and it's just a perspective twist. It's probably the camera looking up. Maybe one corner was pushed slightly up towards the other, or the rest of the building, versus the others. If I look at these, and one trick here, bear in mind, not all cathedrals are exactly symmetrical, so be very careful with that. But this one here, there are certain parts where I think it is. So if I go into this corner specifically here, make it so we can actually see it, shall I? So right in the corner where this joins there, and then I look over here, it's not quite there. You see, it would need to be here rather than here. But more importantly, down the bottom, we're out. So I'd be in a place of, let's do a 4-way keystone. Difficult here because I haven't got really any verticals that I can find. But what I can do is use this white guideline here and just make sure at least that these windows are all lined up. So let's go to there and to there. You notice there's a bit of a barrel here. Interesting. Let's hit apply there. In my lens corrections, we've got a distortion correction already. Interesting. So it's already doing some of the distortion stuff. But there's still a bit of a barrel. Let me just do that. It's having not much of an effect. I'm actually tempted to undo the distortion correction on this. I would turn on diffraction correction on here. You've got quite a lot of high contrast points, especially at the edges, which aren't particularly nice. But to me, that then sort of works. What we've got to do is just fix this top bit. This bit here is not aligned with the middle here. And I'm using this this guideline here, my red guideline. So this is all good here. This is slightly off to the right. The way I fix that is I pull this in and tell Capture One that this should be closer. So in other words, stretch out to the right when I hit apply. That's getting closer. This is coming down and keeping an eye on it. Stretching a touch more. Hit apply. That's getting there. In fact, that's probably about where we need to be. And then one final one is just to look at this top line and make sure that, for instance, here and here, now I can see here, you weren't exactly in the middle, and that's where some of the problems come with keystoning. It's very difficult to be exactly in the middle, don't get me wrong. But that's where some of these problems, they're not quite right. How do I know? Because I can see a gap here between this bit of molding and this bit here. Here I don't see the gap. So we were slightly to the left, which is skewing some of this stuff, and that's where it's coming from. But I can use this as at least a guide to make sure that these are level. That bit into there looks pretty level. This bit now in the middle looks pretty set. So I'm going to stick with that. I think that's probably right. Now, how do I check that? Well, I'm going to go to Georg's one there and this one and see which one feels more correct. And I would argue it's that one. This feels like it's level and not twisted. This now feels like it's twisted around. Maybe that's just me. Maybe we need to do a blind test. But I'm pretty sure that this one is more correct, more geometrically correct than that one there. And it's just one where if you are going to do this stuff, use all the tools. Use keystone, use crop, use rotation, use all those things. Throw at it and get it correct, get it geometrically correct. If this is supposed to be a geometrically correct architectural shot from the middle, make it that. Now, the other problem that you've got here is obviously we've got a bit of a difference here in terms of what's in there, and where this falls down. We're slightly off to the left, effectively. So whether we do that with a crop, I don't know. Let's do an unconstrained just for ease here. And I'm going to go to, is it there? Cool, looks about right, yeah. That's now in the middle, good. And again, I'm just looking for, if we're going to do shapes, if we want to do, you know, the proper architectural approach, you've got to be spot on. You have to be. Use your grid, use your guidelines, use the keystone tool, use the rotation tool, but get it smack bang in the middle. When you've done that, let's look at this green thing here, because if I look at the original, so I'll go before, there is it's a slight greeniness to it, but I think it's just been accentuated by lifting up those colors. So I'm actually in the place of, we create a new layer, and I'm going to put a graduated filter on there. Press the shift key and I can keep it straight. So let's go to there, and then with that, yeah. So I would say always try and straighten two lines and two centers. Otherwise, to Tim's point, it will drive you crazy. These buildings are not always perfectly symmetrical. They're not always perfectly aligned. Sometimes restoration has happened. Sometimes land has sunk, and so on. So, yeah, but you want it to feel like it is at least correct visually. So that's where I'm coming from. This down here, we've got two options. I can untint the green, so we can go to a more ready sort of color there. I will do that, but not to that extent. Maybe up to, I don't know, there. And then I'd be tempted just to pull back a saturation slider a touch. just to there. So we go from that to that. So it just feels a little more neutral, a little more matched to the sort of pinky color up here with that light coming in. But to me, that's a nice shot. It works. This just feels, now you notice it more, it's a little bit skewed, a little bit stretched, a little bit odd. This just feels a bit more boom, bit more boom. We like more boom. Okay, let's move on to our next shot. I just need a drink. Are we going to do this one? We'll do this one quickly because actually it's a quick answer. So this is from Simon. The reason it's a quick answer is because Simon's question was, drum roll, can I get more of this background detail back? And Simon's got a magic brush layer on there. So that magic brush layer grabbed the sky, ignored the stone. Here's the problem. That magic brush layer has a huge shift in saturation, huge shift in brightness, and clarity, structure, and dehaze 100%. Levels to 11. Poor. The short answer is no, you can't really get much of that back. You could push it and push it and push it. The problem with pushing it, and just so that you can see, you see we're already getting these little artifacts, these little shapes, squiggles. Call them squiggles. This area is not masked. This area is masked. In order to get the detail in the background back, that structure and clarity have pushed so much false contrast and so many edge changes and so much micro contrast in the midtones that not only has it, and don't get me wrong, it has got some of it back. Let's have a look. But if I look at that in detail properly, and especially if I were to print it, it's gone from pretty clean to So, short answer, take it on a less foggy day, Simon. The long answer, there are ways. So yes, you could run it through some topaz tools and whatever that would do that. Yes, we could do it a little bit through curves. So if I go into our curve here, let's just see what levels we're at here. So I'm at 179 in my Luma curve, 165, 156, 160. So in other words, I've got a range between about 180 in brightness down to about 142. And what we're saying is we want more of that range. We want to expand that range. So in my curve, let's create a new pop-out tool. So with my curve, I said 180 down to 145, right? So I'm just making the curve tool nice and big so you can see exactly what's happening. So my input and output line. So let's go to 145. And I'm just going to lock in a point there, up to 180 there. And it's this mushy stuff in between that basically is that distance. Bear in mind, I'm only doing it on the magic brush layer, so only on the sky layer. I'm going to anchor everything left and right of it, and I'm doing that by putting two little anchor points on the curve. And then here I'm going to put a midpoint, and I'm going to lift these bits and darken these bits and see what we get. And the answer, the short answer, is not a lot of difference. In fact, we're worse. So let's just find whether we can push it more down to here. Maybe it's all sat in that real upper part. Yeah, maybe. Maybe we're getting some of it back here. So you see how without it, so let me just undo. So that's without, and that's with. Without, with. So we're getting some of it back, but wow, this is messy. I'd be in a place of genuinely it's one to maybe retry on a less hazy day. To Roger's point, where are we? Dehaze and contrast on its own may help. They can. Dehaze and contrast are effectively hidden curve adjustments as well as some other tools. But dehaze has already been applied here. Contrast hasn't yet too much, but the problem with contrast in itself picks the 128 point and it says anything brighter get brighter, anything darker get darker. We've seen all of this is brighter than 128, so all it's going to do is just brighten the whole lot, and you can see that. So as I pull up contrast, it's just brightening all of it by a slightly different amount. So yes, you can do it through a little squiggly adjustment of a curve, but that curve adjustment is going to be so fiddly, and it's not going to reap you huge rewards, and you're still going to end up with horrible artifacts as a result of just pushing all of that contrast in there. If there's not the contrast to start with, the second you start adding it in, and actually a lot of the AI tools are going to do the same thing. They're going to deliver the same. So it's a tough one. And I hate saying it, but sometimes, yeah, this is one where maybe a reshoot. Keith, isn't a pursuit of clarity and purity sometimes incorrect, as objects in the distance will lose clarity naturally because of environmental concerns? Yes, spot on. And objects in the rearview mirror may appear closer than they really are. I think that's the phrase. Either way. But yes, the reality is, as we look through the atmosphere, you do lose clarity. But on a low pressure day, I imagine that goes on for miles, and you might get lucky. Bart, so going back again to JD's question, and this was the same question that Bart had with this edit here. Not going to go too much into the edit because the question was very simple, which was, am I better off starting from linear response or from an auto curve? So just to prove the point, let me create a brand new variant. No, I won't, because that doesn't have any adjustments on, and I don't want to start from nowhere. So I'm going to clone these two. And I'm going to have a red one and a green one. You can't see the green because it's underneath me, but now you will. Okay, green one. We're going to start from auto, or let's be very specific, we're going to start from film standard. Great. And the red one, we're going to start from linear response. And actually what we're going to do, just to be really pedantic, is we are going to reset. Actually, yeah, I should have started from scratch. Silly. Right. So auto curve, or more importantly, film standard, linear response. So I've got two of the same image. This one starts with an auto curve. This one starts with linear response. In both instances, I'm going to be pulling back my highlights, and I'm going to be lifting up my shadows. Not too much. Maybe go to about there. And I can see texture. It's still, don't get me wrong, it's still blown out. Obviously, we can see that. But that's from linear response. So I've had to pull things back. So we pulled back the highlights. Let me just make it easy to remember, by 50, and shadows I've lifted by 20. Done a pretty good job. If I go before and after, we're not getting keys right, because I must be in a tool somewhere. Thank you. I get to see all the detail. Let's go to our auto layer. Minus 50, 20. Not so much detail. So I might now need to pull it back more. Maybe to minus 100. Maybe not so much on here. In fact, shadow doesn't need to come at all down. In fact, I might even want to play with my exposure and pull that down a touch. So linear response, auto, linear response, auto. I might want to put in a bit of a curve and protect my highlights some more in my auto. I go from there to there. The point being, it's the same data. It doesn't give you anything more or less by going from linear response versus auto. All it means is you're having to adjust more or less. In this case here, we've got a super, super high contrast image. To get this clean and to get this able to see properly and, you know, be able to look through and be able to see clouds and so on, you're going to need to tweak your HDR sliders by a lot, you know, dials to 11 for JD's benefit. You're going to probably have to put in a bit of a curve to protect more highlights. You might even need to drop this one like Richard did in the first image. But then I can get back to roughly where my image was. But that's quite a lot of work. Whereas with linear response, I'm already there with just 2 sliders. A little bit of highlight recovery, a little bit of shadow recovery. Why? Because it didn't have that boost to start with. So it's either a case of you're fixing high contrast, start with linear response, great, and then you've got less to fix, but you're going to have to build in some depth. Or if you've got a very flat image, start with film standard or auto, because that's going to boost it to start with some contrast, and then you can control your outer edges as well. One isn't better than the other, they're just 2 different starting points for the same data. If you start with linear response, you haven't lost any data. If you start with film standard, you haven't lost any data. You're just going to use different tools to bring them back. Paula, is the ability to give variants meaningful names instead of numbers make sense? Yes, it does make sense. Can we do it? No, not really. What we can do is oh no, it's going to rename every variant, isn't it? Yeah, no, you can't at the moment. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good idea. Submit it into their little bank. It would be a good one. And then someone asked earlier, I think it was Anthony, why not do a layer with an AI brush and then do a uniform color from the pinker area? Yes, you could. So that was relating to, so this one was Bart's, not Simon's, that was Georg's. Yes, we could choose this area down here with an AI brush and then use the skin tone tool to uniform it. But I don't think it actually needs it. I don't think it needs to be that complex. Just a standard gradient filter or gradient layer. Where are we there? And then just shift your white balance, desaturate. It's doing the same thing pretty much. You're just uniforming down to pretty much gray. So yeah, linear response versus auto or film standard. It's the same data. It's just where you're approaching it from. Can you recover stuff in the background? Yes, you can, but you're also going to recover a load of garbage. So sometimes it's worth just another hike up that hill. Sorry, Simon. Georg, this one works. You've done a good job out of it for a single shot. To get it better, multiple brackets, so HDR it, and if you are going to go to the effort of rotating it and getting it smack bang in the middle, get it smack bang in the middle. And then Richard's one, to me, if we want to really make this atmospheric and pump that tree, flattening everything and warming things up doesn't do that. I want to feel like I'm in a forest. And to me, that one's probably the way of doing it. So, boys and girls, I think that's it for the day. And that's it until 2 weeks' time. So the 15th of April. Between now and then, go there and you can join in next month's competition. For those of you that missed that bit, Roger won. Well done. Roger gets a little bulb man as a statue. Between now and then, you have access to pro tips in this channel. You also have access to all of those masterclasses, which you can go on. They're available for people to download if they so choose. Between now and then, knock yourselves out, get in touch, look after yourselves, send us your images, and we'll see you then. Cheers, everyone. Bye.